the cloud. Welcome everyone. This is week 13, which is very close to the end. Very happy to see you at this stage. I kind of know everyone's face who has ever turned on their camera. So thank you if you did. I feel like I don't need to remind you, but I would not assume that everybody remembers. We do have a code of conduct. We do have a code of conduct which applies to this, but also all the previous calls. If there was anything or there is anything that you would like us to improve about your participation, if anything that made you uncomfortable, anything you would like to report, please write to us at team@weareols.org. You can also contact either you, myself, Bernice, or Taj if you would rather feel safer in writing to someone specifically. The call is being recorded and transcribed, so please find the transcription link on the right top. If Sheon or you can copy that in the chat, please. We will be doing very important breakout discussions today, so please do remember to edit your name to add your preference. Written, you can also write written French if you prefer French. If we do have enough people who meet that requirement, we would put you in the right breakout room. Spoken English, spoken French, also Spanish. We know there are a few of you who speak Spanish, so please do feel free to add Spanish. Okay. Now we're at the icebreaker. Today we're asking you a question which is very relevant to the topic today. So I'm asking you, tell us about a favorite tool, tip, or practice that has improved access, inclusion, or participation for you in a team, a project, or a technology that you use. And I will come back to your icebreaker. If you haven't responded, you have another 15 minutes to respond to this. So with that, I will move to orienting you where we are, and our orientation today would be a bit longer. So we are in the second module of community management, which is CAFE. The community management here is used slightly loosely than in a general professional term. We are talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, and ALIy skill required for managing community well. So we are here. You have one more week where you can meet your mentor before we go on end of year break. And we'll come back in January to cover week 15 and 16, information for which have been sent to you. Welcome all who's joining. We're just getting started. So today, this would be probably the last time you're looking at this Open Leadership Framework statement. Open leaders design and build projects that empower others to collaborate within inclusive community. And as a last cohort call, which is open to everyone, this is the part we're focusing on, inclusive communities. By the end of this call, we hope that you would be able to understand how to combine open science and ALIy skill practices to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion. I want to emphasize that last call was a lot around knowledge equity, participation. A few more calls have covered those elements. So today's focus would be a lot around diversity and inclusion. And we will also talk about ALIy skills as something that we want to learn, a behavior as community leaders or project leaders. And we hope by the end of this cohort call, you would learn a little bit more about how you can use these skills to lead and work openly. So I'm sure you have heard this multiple times in different places. Diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So diversity means attracting different kinds of people, different groups of people, people with different experiences to be part of a community. As researchers, as most of you are, all our research communities, thinking about whose voices should be heard in the work that we do. And inclusion is to retain that diverse people, to make sure that they are empowered by providing them with an environment that is bringing the best out of their combined skill. What is the use of a diverse community if we don't create opportunity for these people to talk to each other and collaborate with each other and share their experiences? So that's where the community management sits. This is one of our favorite slide from Alex Chan, who gave this talk in our very first cohort, where they talked about inclusion can't be an afterthought. It has to be part of our design process. We've already talked about design process in terms of persona and pathway, ensuring that people's experiences are embedded in the work that you do. And we're going to double down on that today. So open science, we have been talking about that the goal of open science is to democratize accessibility and participation in research. But just because open science wants to do that doesn't mean it will happen by itself. In fact, if we don't intentionally design open science project, it can be very inaccessible or unwelcoming for many people. Because if we don't, if we just say it's an open thing, you can just join, and people feel very confused about how to join, who to talk to, how to contribute, how to raise difficult questions. People wouldn't really feel that this project is welcoming to them. So taking diverse perspective and privileges of people who are in your community into account, we can think about how to design our team projects and communities that are for inclusion. So if you can see, this is where I'm asking you question to think about your own experiences working with teams, communities, or technology that felt inclusive. So our understanding of diversity is only as broad as our community. We can call diversity in different sense. We can think about people with different level of technical or resource access, maybe geographically or economically different. People who have visible or invisible disability, physical or mental health needs. People who have experiences working in marginalized communities. They come from different genders, nationality, ethnicity, career, culture, age, language, and particularly speaking about those who have previously been excluded or stigmatized in the past. So we need to think about these experiences. And of course, in some places, we might not be able to accommodate all of them, but part of open science is to be honest and open about who is the space for, who can we serve, who we cannot serve. And that transparency is also more important than trying to serve everyone badly. So if you're building something, there are many ways to make it inclusive. So for example, let's think about this ORCID. By this time, I hope you all have an ORCID ID for yourself. We have talked about a lot in the past that a lot of researchers will go on to change their name. People, for whatever reason, they abandon previous name, but they have to live with that previous name because our scientific articles did not have other ways to connect our work if our names are not there. But ORCID, for example, allows us to use our aliases and different names, which means that your identity is a code, that it doesn't matter what name you want to use, your code is connected to the research output you're publishing. So it takes away some of these, emotional burden of people who have to see their dead name or past name despite having changed it. So you can think about inclusion from that perspective. You also know that in OLS, we have all our videos that are transcribed by our facilitators community to at least make sure that people who cannot listen can read those transcriptions. So putting our video online and thinking that anybody can access it and they can learn about what we're saying, and not putting the effort to make it accessible for people with hearing impairment or people who can't play loud videos. That is also a form of accessibility. So when we communicate, this is just one example of thinking about hidden traits of people. So there are 12% of the entire population in the world who are left-handed, and most of our technology has been designed for right-handed people. So unless a left-handed technology developer comes in, they wouldn't really remember that there are these 12% people who are being excluded. But you could also think about information like wheelmap.org, where people have marked their areas with accessible, partially accessible, or not at all accessible location. So right now I'm actually inside British Library, which is the screenshot here, and you can see which part are not accessible. So this is one of the busiest area. And then, of course, this is something that is luckily becoming a normal practice, that we add alt text in images. If we don't add alt text, people who cannot see, people who are blind or visually impaired, they use screen readers. And the screen reader would read these random name, IMG 584792, and they have no idea what we are asking them to look at. So the alt text describes this image. So of course it says cute cat, but you could describe it even better. And you can think about inclusion in different sense. And again, I would like you to go back to the responses that people are sharing, which is much more broader than the example that I'm bringing. So thinking about inclusion, not just in one dimension, but multiple dimension, and knowing that no matter what we do, that's by inserting your idea, there's always an opportunity for doing better. So designing for inclusion and participation, we've talked about it in the previous cohort calls, that we want to make sure that people can find our work, we can create pathways for others to get involved and support and mentor them. We can create opportunities for diverse perspectives to be fed back into our work. So going back to our mountain of engagement, or what Laura Carter presented last time, the participation ladder, um, how to recognize these people who are working with us. How can we create visible and well-supported roles? So knowing that there are a lot of work that happens behind the curtain, they are hidden, and there are lots of minority taxes in terms of people who are affected by certain disadvantages, have to work harder to overcome those disadvantages. So how can we make sure that those are addressed? And also, like, if you are building a community, one of the long-term goal is to allow community to build processes and ensure that they know how any decision that you're making are made, as well as people are fairly rewarded. And this also applies for if you're just writing a paper. How can you make sure that people who are contributing to it are acknowledged as authors with you, or have the opportunity to write with you or share your knowledge together? So I want to transition out from here. So obviously we've talked about equity quite a lot throughout our cohort calls. Today we are focusing on diversity and inclusion, but also knowing that learning about diversity and inclusion, or trying to do something about diversity and inclusion without substantive change, without radical change, accomplishes nothing. Meaning that it doesn't matter how much we try to tweak our current system, if we don't really become, in some sense, I would say, bold, if we don't step up for other people, if we don't step out of our own comfort zone, sometimes changes wouldn't happen. And that brings me to AlIy skills, which is one of our main topic today, which we hope you would enjoy. And it's going to be slightly different format. And I'm happy to hand it over to you to get us all started on that.
Okay. Technically, according to the emoji key, oh yeah, it is me who's starting. I thought you were, I was going to argue with you, Malvika, and say, no, it's not my turn yet. Let me share my screen. No, let me do this. Okay, slideshow. Now. All right, are you seeing what I hope you're seeing? Yeah, okay, I've got thumbs up from Malvika. This is exceptional. It's good to be with you here, folks, today. So we're going to talk about AlIy skills, what that means, and we're actually going to introduce ourselves. You definitely know Malvika by now. You may have seen me around in a call or two, but you may not know me. But there's actually a purpose behind us also introducing ourselves again as well. So if you're here, we hope that you agree that oppression exists and that it needs to be stopped. If you really want to argue this point, we won't say anything if you leave right now. That's fine. It's a-okay. But the purpose of this is for people who would like to talk about ways to handle oppression, to recognize the systemic challenge and work against it when we can safely. And we know you'll also have questions after this. We sometimes run a 3-hour session that can still overrun. So to give you an idea, there is no way we can possibly cover everything today. Just beware. And you will also notice there's little emojis up on the top left. I'm Sunflower, Malvika is Tulip. I have this terrible tendency of like just not paying attention and running through and running through and running through. So start waving your arms at the screen and just say, yo, you're doing Malvika's slides again, if I do it. Anyway, I'll move on. Okay. Like I said, you want to leave? You don't have to tell us why. It could be you don't agree. It could be we've said something you really don't want to hear or that has triggered something. It's fine to leave. Or it could be you need to go pee. All of these are good. It's fine to leave. You don't have to justify it. We will not record any of the interactive stuff because we're going to be talking about some seriously sensitive topics. We're never asking you to share anything you don't want to share. But by its nature, when we talk about oppression, we talk about ways that people are oppressed, and very often personal stories end up coming out anyway. So if you have to share anything else onwards, or if you're sharing thing like later in the future, anonymize it. Give people the safety of this space. So you can say, oh yeah, I heard a story about someone who, I don't know, was groped by a supervisor. That's one thing to say, but not to say, yeah, actually Laura said that, because that's not why they were sharing it at any given time. Um, anyway, Malvika, who are you?
Yeah, folks, you know me, but I'm gonna tell you anyway a little bit more about myself because you know me as one of the persons who comes and leads some of these calls. I am a person who was born in India, in the northeast of India, from in a state called Jharkhand. From a small city called Ranchi, with 1 million population, so small from Indian perspective. I moved to south of India to do my bachelor's in biotechnology, and trust me, it's a very different world. The languages are not the same, and that's when I actually had to start speaking in English in a conversational thing. I finished my bachelor's, and I was quite interested in continue working in biotechnology, but I was a terrible, terrible lab person. I was never good at lab experimental studies, but I loved biology. So I wanted to move to bioinformatics. So I moved to Germany to do master's. I carried on doing my PhD in bioinformatics, got very interested in community building from the very beginning of my PhD, and had luckily some opportunities and really great mentors who allowed me to work in that. And I worked with European Molecular Biology Laboratory for over 4 years before moving to London, where I still reside. Towards the end of my time in Germany, Yo, Bernice, and I co-founded OLS. Um, and I'm very excited to tell you all that since last couple of weeks, I have increased my time in OLS, and I'll have more chances to work with our community. I'm also a senior researcher at the AlIy Turing Institute, which is half of my time, and where I co-lead the Turing Way. Actually, now with Ariel Bennett, who's also on the call, who is one of my very favorite colleagues. On the right, you all see all the logos from different open science communities that I have been part of, that has really shaped the way that I think or I see myself in the community. And working with them has also improved my own confidence in that I have something to bring into open space. Over to you, Yo.
Why, thank you very much, Dr. Sharon. All right. Okay. And here's the version of the slide that I did. Malvika said I had to put a picture in because she's a very, very harsh taskmaster. So I'm based in the UK, but I'm originally Kiwi, with a stop on the way living in Israel for a few years. So sometimes my party joke is, yeah, I genuinely have three passports. Um, but I had a rather different route to where we are today. So I worked in industry as a software engineer, various tech-related things. And if I look very far back, I can even remember the boring, boring millions of faxes I used to have to send. And somewhere along the way, I thought, hey, academia and research is kind of cool. And I did my undergrad whilst working full time. And by the time I finished it, it took me about 6 years. I was actually already working at Cambridge as a software engineer, but also as a community manager. And that wasn't really an official title very often, at least in 2015 when I joined. It was never my official title. My official title was always just software engineer, but I wrote almost no code by the end of my 5 years there. For a while, I worked at the Wellcome Trust, which is a philanthropic grant maker based in the UK. But when we got enough money to pay me, I quit all of the boring stuff and I decided instead that maybe I'll just come and work as an executive director for one of the best things we've ever founded. And I decided to do a doctorate after I'd worked at Cambridge for a while. And I'm like, I'm not sure that I'm ever going to be able to progress further with only a bachelor's. And I'm going to put that in quote, only bachelor's, because I don't believe that, but it's more about how other people perceive me necessarily than whether or not I perceive people that way. And so I did my learning basically in parallel at the same time as working full time between 2009 and 2024, which is too long. I do not recommend doing this unless you don't see any other choice. Um, And yeah, like Malvika, I've got some nice fancy logos on the right. And I still remember the day when I told Mum that I was working on a project with NASA, and she was like, "You mean that NASA?" I'm like, "There's not any other NASA, Mummy." And this is going to go on YouTube now. Oh, great. Anyway, I'm going to continue, and we will explain why we did those very elaborate introductions in a little bit. But we're going to start talking about some terminology. You may have this, you may not. We want to make sure that we're all in rough agreement for what the terminology is. So, first of all, we're going to use the word privilege a lot. And that is an unearned advantage that some people get but others don't. And one little star I'll put beside this is that it's radically contextual. So, for example, I live in the UK, and it might be a privilege for me to be white here. It might not be somewhere else. Um, or I'm Israeli, right? And it would definitely be a privilege for me to be Israeli in Israel. It doesn't feel like it so much outside of Israel right now. So all of the privileges that we have tend to be contextual. And we have multiple different identities at any given time. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the other term we want to talk about is oppression. So that is the fact that this world just ain't fair. And that means that that affects different populations in different ways, and very often, maybe unintentionally, but no less real, people with more privilege tend to be less oppressed, and vice versa. Those with fewer privileges tend to be more oppressed. Um, More terminology, a marginalized person. They tend to be people that are targeted by oppression in one or more ways. I've heard many, many different terms, and it's very hard to agree on what terminology to use around this. One of the ones that I like the most, I think, is rising identity, which looks at the opposite. It says rather than saying you're a minority or a global south or lots of terms that often feel put down, that the rising identity suggests that, you know what, from here there's only up. But for this, we'll be using the term marginalized person to recognize someone that may be a target of oppression. And then we'll talk about allies. So that is someone who, in a particular context, has a privilege and actively works to end oppression. And to be aware of your own privilege. And the reason that we say actively works is that you can't say, yeah, I'm an ally, and then sit there and watch some oppression happen and chill and, yeah, but I'm an ally, don't complain to me. And say, no, you're a friend at that point, maybe, but allies are active. So it's a doing thing, not a label, not a badge you can wear. And of course, that doesn't mean that we should martyr ourselves or say, I'm going to save everyone, and in so end up not being able to do anything at all, because that's not going to be effective either. So one of the goals here is not to look at someone who already is struggling with marginalization, who feels like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm a bad person because I'm not stepping up when something bad is happening. We want you to think about doing it in a safe and reasonable and sensible and practical way. As I said, ally is a verb, not an identity. Don't wear a badge. Don't say, I'm an ally. Be an ally. Do a thing. We'll talk about specific situations later on about how you can practice allyship, but the main thing is to remember that words alone without actions aren't enough to be useful. Words can be an action, but I just mean don't say I'm an ally. Be the ally. Checking I'm still on my emojis. Alrighty. Okay, so this is an example. This doesn't work all of the time when we teach these, because like I've mentioned, things are very contextual. It may be that this one doesn't correlate to you. Um, if that's the case, we can talk about others. But the example here is the privilege is the ability to walk into a shop and not have someone assume that you are actually there to buy to steal things, which is rotten. It's absolutely awful. And there's a lot of TV and systemic bias that might make you think that people who look a certain way might be someone who is a thief. So in a majority white country, for example, it might be that someone who is black is automatically targeted and assumed to be more likely to commit some sort of crime. But that sort of circumstance will happen in different scenarios in different ways. I've actually had this scenario happen to me when I was a child, and I guess a lot of children must have been stealing stuff from that particular supermarket. And I went back and I got my dad, and then he like told the person off. But it can happen in many different scenarios. Um, Malvika, it's your turn. I noticed. Are you proud?
Yes, you did well, yo. So I wanted to take on this side of the slide because looking at some of the examples from my own context. So in India, I grew up with a lot of advertisement about this skin whitening product called Fair and Lovely. And we wouldn't even ask, why do I need to use it? It was just assumed that if you want to look lovely, you got to use a fairness cream. And it is really, really bad for skin because it has bleach. One of their advertisement includes a woman who has darker skin and she goes for a job interview and she wasn't offered the job interview, and then she uses this cream and then she was offered the job interview. So these two girls, they go on to do actual research on if this is true, if people actually offer you a job based on your skin color or not. What they found that that's not the case, that skin color preferences are not aligned to job offering or not, but the social context where we operate these kind of ideology can be fed into our brain, and we can think about the linkage of our beauty with our ability. So the question around the power currently is with people who are building counter narrative, not just about feeling that we are oppressed because of our skin color, but also how can we, these two women are doing research to bring power back to people who are generally oppressed in social context. So I wanted to add a counter example for what you was saying, as we realize that that example of privilege and oppression can look different. Next, please. So another example of marginalized person could be a person with disability or caring responsibility, someone who is applying for a job where they might need special consideration, people who may have mental health requirement or anything that they are not very comfortable revealing, but it would improve their life significantly. So a person of color or immigrant identity applying for a job in the UK. So because we are in the UK, we thought we'll give you some example of that. One of the references that we have added in there says that a person who says I have attended many, many interviews as the only Caucasian with less qualification and got the job. Whereas a lot of people of color or women don't even get invited if their names do not sound particularly white. So AlIy in this case would mean people who enjoy specific privilege, use their time, expertise, or income to reform their organization or higher level policies that benefit marginalized member. So if we take the situation when we know that our organization has history of hiring only Caucasian people despite having bad qualification, you can work with your own policymaker or equity, diversity, inclusion team, or wherever you have the power to change that. So that's the counter that an AlIy does when reforming an organization or behavior in your system. I hope that makes sense. So next one. So we don't want you to think about power privileges as binary. It's not true that I am privileged and I am underprivileged. I am both. As an immigrant living in a country, I may have some disadvantages, but I also have a good job. I have a secure job. Um, and I have qualification that makes me privileged compared to other people who may not have secure job and may not have technical access or access to education. So we should look at our identities and privileges in these kind of, as Yo was saying, contextual. So the power in this case, or in any case, would mean ability to control circumstances, to access to resources and or privilege. In my case, again, I can look at our work with OLS. Our power is to create platforms, education resources that are accessible for people. But our power could also be to completely shut that off and say that if you pay me subscription, then only we will give you access. So thinking about where do you want to put your power? And maybe it's not wrong either way, but our ideology is more aligned to opening our resources. There's also multiple identity, right? Like none of you are just man or woman. You have multiple identities around a person with different, maybe just taking to my own example. I'm a woman, I'm from India, I live in the UK, I have spent a decade in Europe, and now I have European passport, which is huge privilege, um, which wasn't the case before I got that passport, right? So my identity is quite intersectional in that sense. Intersectionality means, and I was like trying to cross with my hand because a lot of our identity are intertwined with each other. So it's a concept that people can be subject to multiple system of operation that intersect and interact with each other. So this term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to speak about African American in the US. So this concept comes from American context, of course, but it is now used everywhere. It has become quite global. So in the US context, a Black woman in America may have multiple level of disadvantages compared to white man, white woman, or brown man, brown woman, Black man, and then Black women. So Black women generally fall into the lower category of privileges. So we want you to first think about your own identity through that intersectional lens, but also think about other people's identity through that intersectional lens. It's never black and white, as in like claiming that all white male are privileged is not true. There are white male with disability, living in poverty, living on street, may have different things that we can't see. So they're also intersectional. We're also trying to think about our role within a community from that perspective. Okay, next slide. So why focus on AlIy skill? As we have been saying that AlIy skill is an action, the reason for that action is that it requires us to step up, doing something that we wouldn't do otherwise, creating opportunities in places where we do recognize we have the power for other, to open the doors for other marginalized people who are not automatically included. So AlIy skill would mean that in one situation where you think you have recognized you have power or access to a space, ensuring that you can open up that space or make that space safer for people who may not be invited otherwise. And the part of that AlIy skill is to be able to identify that opportunity. And you need to learn that. It's possible that in one situation you identified opportunity only after the fact or the situation had gone, but this behavior would allow you to do better the next time. So don't, as Yo was saying, this is a definitely learned skill. The more you practice, the better you get. So this is a lot about us putting focus on this kind of skills today. Next, please. All right, so we're gonna stop talking for a minute and allow you to go back to your Frama pad and think about this particular prompt. Can you think of an incident where you felt singled out or not taken seriously and nobody stepped up for you? So that's the prompt. Think about it. You can write it for yourself. You don't need to share. But if you feel you would like to share, you can use chat or Frama pad for that. So I'll give you about 2-3 minutes to reflect on it.
I also wonder if anyone can identify a scenario like this. Think of a friend or something you've witnessed.
All right, to lighten the mood a little bit, I put this meme. There's a very fun movie called Enola Holmes. There are two parts. The second part is even better than the first part. And I love this quote, and I never forgot since I heard it first time. This woman says, "So politics doesn't interest you. Why?" And this guy says, "Because it's very boring." And her response was, "No, because you have no interest in changing a world that suits you so well." So a lot of people do not recognize that they have a lot of privileges. If their life is all right and nothing is happening and people around them are constantly complaining, they may assume, I don't know what they're complaining about. Everything is all right. But the fact is that we are often aware of our own privileges. And we should be probably paying a bit more attention to what broken system of our world actually suits us and in fact needs to be fixed so it can involve more people. And again, my intention to ask you to think about it is to think about how these kind of behaviors can be detrimental to a community's well-being. This is another publication that came out, and there's a number of interviews that were published in the Scholarly Kitchen, where they talk about, and this is an example from, again, Western context, women of color who enter an organization. They are part of big leadership. After a while, they get singled out and excluded from whatever decision is being made. And when the decision is being made, and if they speak up about that, why am I being excluded? A retaliation can happen, and they can call this single person as the troublemaker, and remove them from the organization. And there have been a lot of cases where this happened.
Right, identify your power and privilege, my friends. Let me close that. Righty. Okay, so I'm going to paste the assignment straight into chat. Um, Power and privilege. And so this is a scenario where we're actually going to be asking you all to just spend a minute or two, look through. We have prompts of different types of possible power and privilege. There may be some that you never thought of, and there may be ones that you've thought of that aren't on the list. But hop into a breakout room. We're going to ask you if you have space and you want to chat with the people in your room. You can do, but again, no one is obligated to share anything that you don't want to be sharing. So if you look at the Etherpad, we are on line 110. I've pasted that in the chat as well. And I think Malvika has pasted a link to the slide in question. So let me just make the breakout rooms super quickly.
I'm making it here, don't worry.
Oh, you are gorgeous and beautiful.
Keep talking to
The
people for a second.
Yeah, I can keep stalling. All right, my friends. Are the instructions clear? Can we have some thumbs up if they are, or now is a space for questions if not? We've got thumbs. Ah, okie dokie. Well, we have a moment or two for questions. One thing to remember is that this is contextual. So I know one thing that I've seen people say when discussing these kinds of things is it's like I see this thing saying a mother is a privilege or not being a mother is a privilege. How can both of those be true at the same time? If I'm a working professional, very often not being a mother is a privilege. If you're in a group of mums and you're the only one who's not a mum, you will feel like you will be one of the less privileged people. So remember that considering context can absolutely change everything. Malvika, how you doing with the rooms?
I am ready. So I'm going to open the room. We have about 10 minutes for you there. If you are in a room which is not preferred language, because your name doesn't have preferred language, I have assigned you to general room. Please come back to the main room and I can assign you to a different room. So I'll put you in there.
All right. So we have about half an hour left on the call, my friends. So we won't spend too long just on this quick question, but I just want to ask if anyone would like to volunteer either in chat or you're welcome to unmute. Was there anything that surprised you that you wouldn't mind sharing with us? Because we often find that people are like, I never thought about that one. And it's completely optional, so you don't have to share if you don't want, but if anyone wants to.
Yeah, I can
Okay.
share. This is
Thank
Arnie.
you. Go for
Yeah.
it.
So with just the sources of privilege, I got 11 out of 16. So I didn't know I had that power. And then on the second combined, power and privilege, I have 9 out of 15. So at 60%. So it's not bad.
We definitely saw some smiles of commiseration as other people were like, yeah, I was surprised how much I had too.
Ah, yay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. And I did see someone put their hand up. Was it Chica?
Yes. I think for me, one of the things that surprised me in looking at the sources of privilege was I never would have said not being a mother or a caregiver was a source of privilege. These are things that kind of get taken for granted sometimes, especially because on the other side of the box, where we look at the combined power and privilege, we see things like being married, you know. So it was interesting to, let's say, look at both sides of the prism while doing this exercise. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It really highlights our intersectionality as well and how we're complex beings with many different aspects. So folks, feel free to share more in the chat. I can see a couple more that have happened in chat, but we want to make sure that we cover the last bit of curriculum. Like I've mentioned, this could easily be a 3-hour workshop. We've given 90 minutes. We want to respect your time. So next slide. Come on, we can do this. Now we're going to talk a little bit about scenarios, because when you're dealing with all of the things like this, you often get to the point where you're like, did that just happen? But we want to talk about how to move past, did that just happen, to I've responded to the thing that just happened and made me like say rude words that I won't put on YouTube. So part of that is thinking through scenarios and practicing. Of course, when the real world thing does happen, it'll never be the same as what you've practiced, but maybe it'll have given you one or two of those skills and pathways to think about how to handle this kind of thing. So we'll talk about scenarios. And so what will happen is we'll send you all, once again, with a set of scenarios into a breakout room. And this scenario will be something like the examples we gave earlier. You know, someone walking into a shop and automatically they'll be assumed to be a thief rather than someone who's purchasing. And then we'll say, as an ally, if you are someone who does have privilege in this situation, what are you going to do about it? And so we ask for a couple of rules in the group discussion. Try and assign a moderator in your group. That's someone who's keeping an eye what's going on and just making sure that everyone is getting a chance to talk, that no one's stepping on anyone else. Moderate the moderator if you have to, but hopefully the moderator is moderate. And make sure that you have a note taker so that stuff gets written down. And in order to avoid the let's report back, and then there's just like crickets, echoing silence, we'll ask you to nominate a report taker as well. Now, it's possible for the report taker to have been the moderator or the notes taker, but I will remind you of two things. One of which is notes often ends up becoming a feminine thing. Dudes, please step up. And the other one is moderators shouldn't speak too much either. Something I'm so guilty of. And try and rotate the roles if we do multiple scenarios. I don't think we will. We won't have time for that. Anyway, next slide. Introduce yourselves. You may have done that already because we're going to put you, I think, in the same breakout groups as before to save a bit of time. But make sure people have a vague idea of who you are so they know who they're interacting with. If you wish to, you can share pronouns. Like I've said, note taker, moderator, facilitator, timekeeper often falls to moderator as well, but it's another thing to keep an eye on. Moderator, here are some tips for you. Think who is dominating discussion. Think if anyone's having difficulty being heard. Pay attention. Is the woman getting stepped on? Is the white guy being told your opinion isn't valid? Because that's not cool either. And how do these discussions compare to ones you've had in other contexts? Next, ally skills. We said we'll give you a scenario and we'll ask you, think about how you might handle it if you are an ally in this scenario. So here are some tips for basic ally skills. First one, short, simple, and firm. So not cool, dude. Sometimes that is all you need to do to be an ally when someone, I don't know, says something racist or sexist. It can be that straightforward. Short, simple, firm. Don't try to be funny though. Those often end up at jokes to someone else's expense. It's not worth it. Recognize the audience and match your responses to the audience in question. You might treat an argument with your grandpa about a racist thing that he's saying slightly differently from how you would teach one of your students. Pick your battles. Again, martyring yourself, losing your job because you actually don't have that much power in this situation, probably not worth it. And ally actions are the bare minimum. There's something, yep, I agree, I know I should be doing. Yeah. Next question. If you're quaking in your boots, and trust me, when you get to a real life scenario, you will be quaking in your boots. You'll be like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? What if I am wrong? Inaction is almost always worse than a mistaken but well-intended action. If you screw up, apologize. Don't make it about you. Last thing you want is for the marginalized person to be comforting you because you made a little boo-boo. Move on. Are you awkward yet? Is this uncomfortable? We've got foxes for you. I hope you're smiling now. Oh, another fox. I mean, just look at those little fennec foxy ears. I hope you're smiling. And I mean, not everyone can sleep curled up on their feet, but this fox can. Right. What do you do when you make a mistake? You apologize, correct, and move on. I'm going to share one of my experiences. Oh, Malvika, this is your slide. I shut up now.
Yeah, you can share your mistake too.
You go first.
The reason why we say don't hang on is that move on, apologize and move on. Don't try to explain yourself. It is better that way. One of my biggest mistake, and I tell it to every time because I still remember it, misgendering one of my colleagues. One of the person I met, they had introduced themselves previously to me and their preferred pronouns were she and they. And I said, oh, but you got to meet someone, and I took them with me and introduced them as him. And I immediately caught myself. I apologized, but I felt terrible because I do recognize that I have biases. It's not the, I shouldn't have done it, but also recognizing that there are things that I need to learn. And I want to acknowledge that that was awkward and not great, but they were very gracious. And when I apologized, they didn't make a big deal about it. Yo, you want to share yours?
Sure. It's one that I literally did about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was so like, what an idiot. But you know how sometimes your brain and your mouth are very closely connected, and stuff comes out before you've said, wait a second, no, you shouldn't say that. And someone said to me, yeah, well, I could always work at OLS. And I looked at them and I said, yeah, we could use a token white guy. And I'm like, oh my God, that was completely out of line. For starters, one of the things that, like Malvika's already said, is that, like, people are intersectional, and just because someone is male and because someone is white does not mean that, I don't know, they might not be queer, they might not be disabled, there might not be so many things I don't know about them. And my general assertion and we can use a token was just rude. So I apologized. But I'm still cringing, absolutely cringing. And so I know it's hard to move on. Malvika, back to you.
Next, please. So we're going to move you to one of the demo part. So moving on further. Yeah, one thing to say, there are no trick questions. Do not focus too much on the scenario itself. Don't try to critique the scenario. Just focus on what skills you can take to take action. If you're not sure what is the meaning of that scenario, just, unpack the explanation that you have and go with it. Again, the focus is on the action, less on the situation. Focus on how someone like you or others can act as an ally in that scenario, not as marginalized person. So of course, we do live our trauma, and I'm sorry I made you do that in the earlier exercise, but we are going to focus on us being in that scenario. It's not about you. Don't make it about you. And this is very literal you. But when we write in the scenario, you is not you. It's a theoretical person. I hope that makes sense. All of these slides are available for later access. Next, please. So you and I will do a very quick demo, and literally like 2 minutes demo, so we can send you for at least 15 minutes discussion. So there is a scenario at a meeting. A woman makes a suggestion, but no one picks it up. Later on in the same meeting, a man makes the same suggestion and is given credit for it. So you and I are going to do a discussion as if this is a breakout room. So what would you as an ally do in this situation?
So I would probably say something along the lines of, yeah, nice one, John. Sarah said that a few minutes ago. She had a really great idea, and make it really clear that whilst John might have thought of it, actually it was Sarah's idea first.
Yeah, I think it makes it sometimes also easy to say, oh, I wonder, we can hear more from Sarah about it because she already mentioned that. Another thing which I like, where we say always take notes in the meeting and attribute who said what, because then you can always say, oh yeah, I recorded that in the notes. Sarah said that. What else?
And that's a systemic change. So me saying, hey, that was Sarah, that's an immediate response that treats the symptom. But usually these things come from more systemic challenges. And so, Malvika, your approach of saying, we'll make sure that there's a note taker who records who said what is more systemic, because we're making sure that Sarah gets the credit no matter what.
All right, thank you so much, Yo. So you got to do literally that. We're going to show you two scenarios. It's copied also in the Frama path. So next one is a scenario very similar, but on the language. Oh yeah, we'll
You
come
want
back.
the previous?
No,
You
I
do.
would copy that in the Frama pad because I really want
Okay.
to save us time.
Yep.
So the language one, you would have a chance to read that. Very similar to what we just discussed, but on a language one. The next one is on recruitment. So scenario 2. So your idea is to go and select one of these scenarios. The scenarios are posted in Pad in the line number 132 onwards. We'll put you in the same room as before, so as you don't have to spend time introducing yourself. We'll pull you back in 12 minutes.
Yeah, same.
All
Yeah.
right. I hope that's clear. Please select one scenario, discuss that in your room, and we'll pull you back in 12 minutes.
Don't take long. Flip a coin, choose one.
All right, so the breakout sessions have ended, and we have had slight report out, which we did not record, but we wanted to say that there are about 3 hours of topics that we tried to condense in 90 minutes, which wasn't obviously possible. So we ask you to come back to it. Please remind yourself of some of the simple response you can learn. So here are some examples. You can always ask people to clarify their assumption. Asking them, can you explain that? Or, oh, that's not okay. Or keep it respectful, or I don't find that funny, or inappropriate. Not cool is shortest, and it works really well. Call out, right? Like you don't need to explain a lot. Often people may not realize their own assumption, but being challenged actually helps them to reflect on that. All right, so assumption at present, for example, everyone has equal chance. So we're looking at language where people think that everybody gets to speak in a meeting if they're attending. So assumption is that everybody has equal chance. The reality is that a lot of people who are marginalized, they face microaggression, discrimination, dismissal, which can be perpetuated if we don't notice it and don't call it out. So you can reframe situations by saying, the real issue is that marginalized people have to work much harder to be heard, and we need to be actively addressing and correcting this imbalance. This assumption reality reframe works really well for recruitment scenario. So some of you responded to how would you talk about calling this out where someone is calling about lowering the bar for recruitment. Okay, so there's the reality is that widely documented bias, harassment, and discrimination and other exclusionary behavior creates especially hostile climate for people in STEM. So some of the answers to that higher bar is actually about systematic. How can we make sure that historically excluded people have chance to have better opportunity and equal? All right, so we have a lot of resources that you can come back to. With that, I want to just show you very quickly, there are a few closing thoughts. We have set some document for you to go back to, for example, setting goals for yourself to be an AlIy. We would be hosting some 3-hour workshops next year if you want to come back and exercise some more of these scenarios with us. Most importantly, this Friday, we are hosting our last informal coffee chat, where we would try to pair you up into collaboration and ideas that you may want to share with each other. We will be uploading all our resources from last 13 weeks on YouTube and all slides on Zenodo, so you can download them. For anything, please reach out to us on Slack or email. And with that, thank you so much for watching this.